The Millionaire's Proposition. Rain fell softly against the glass of the little bakery where Evelyn Hart sat alone, her trembling hands wrapped around a chipped cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The streets outside glowed with the reflections of neon signs and passing cars, a blur of colors that mocked the darkness she felt inside. Just 6 months ago, this place had been filled with laughter, the scent of vanilla cream and sugar, the soft clatter of plates, and the gentle hum of her dreams taking shape. But now, every table was empty. The chairs stacked in corners, the oven cold and lifeless. Her dream, Sweet Haven Bakery, had been destroyed by a sudden gas leak and fire that took everything she had built. Every memory of her mother's recipes, every cent she had saved from years of double shifts and sleepless nights, all of it had vanished in one cruel night. When the insurance company denied her claim, citing maintenance negligence, she had felt her world shatter all over again. The debts had piled up like storm clouds. Rent overdue, bank letters threatening legal action. The walls of her tiny apartment now felt like a cage she couldn't escape. Her father had passed years ago, her mother gone since college, and there was no one left to turn to. The city, once full of possibilities, now felt like a trap tightening around her neck. That night, as she sat in the ruins of her dream, her best friend Nora entered quietly, her nurse uniform still stained from a long shift at the hospital. Nora had always been the practical one, the kind who spoke the truth even when it hurt. She took one look at Evelyn, her eyes soft with sympathy but firm with something else. "Eve," she said, pulling up a chair, "there might be a way out." Evelyn lifted her tired eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Unless you've got a time machine or a miracle check, I don't think anything can help me now." Nora hesitated, then leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "There's a man, a patient's relative, actually. He's wealthy, beyond wealthy. His name's Alexander Graves. He owns half the city's tech sector. He's different, cold maybe, but powerful. He's looking for someone." Evelyn frowned, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Someone? Like what? A personal assistant? I can type, I can bake, I can do almost anything except breathe underwater." Nora shook her head slowly. "Not like that. He's looking for someone to have his child." The words hung between them like thunder. Evelyn blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Nora sighed. "Not adoption, not artificial stuff. He wants it the natural way. One time, one night, one deal. He's offering $2 million. Upfront, legal contracts, medical care, everything." Evelyn's heart pounded against her ribs. "You can't be serious? You're talking about selling myself." "No," Nora said softly. "I'm talking about surviving. You've lost everything. This could rebuild your life." Evelyn rose to her feet, anger and humiliation swirling together. "You think I could just go to a man's bed for money? Carry his child like some transaction?" "You'd be surprised," Nora said quietly, "at what people do when the world leaves them no choice. And Alex Graves, he's not a monster. He's a man who's been through his own losses. He just doesn't believe in love anymore." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed Nora's words again and again. She hated herself for even thinking about it. But when she looked at the eviction notice on her kitchen counter, when she saw the unpaid hospital bills for her mother's treatment that she had never finished paying, something inside her cracked. $2 million could change everything. She could rebuild. She could finally live without fear. 3 days later, she stood in front of the towering glass building of Graves International. The sky mirrored in its windows like a judgmental god watching her every move. She smoothed her thrift store blazer and whispered to herself, "You're not selling yourself. You're buying back your life." The receptionist led her to a private elevator, her stomach tightening with every ascending floor. When the doors opened, she found herself in an office that looked like it belonged in another world. Polished marble, soft lighting, and a wall of glass overlooking the city skyline. Alexander Graves turned from the window as she entered. He was taller than she expected, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. His presence was cold, commanding, but not cruel. His eyes, ice gray and unreadable, studied her with unnerving calm. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice deep, smooth, and measured. "Please." "Sit!" Evelyn obeyed, her heart racing. He sat across from her, folding his hands on the desk. "You already know why you're here. I assume Nora told you the general terms." Evelyn nodded, her voice trembling. She said something about you wanting a child. "Not wanting," he corrected evenly. "Needing. My father's will requires an heir to retain the majority of the company's shares. I have no interest in marriage or relationships. I need an heir, simple as that. You fit the criteria. Healthy, intelligent, no criminal record, and desperate enough to consider my offer." The bluntness cut through her like a knife. Evelyn stared at him, half offended, half fascinated. "You investigated me?" "Of course," he said. "I don't enter agreements blindly." "This isn't personal, Miss Hart. It's business. You would conceive my child naturally, carry to term, and after the birth, the child would be legally mine. You would receive $2 million, a private apartment, full medical care, and complete discretion. No one would know." Evelyn swallowed hard, her pride and desperation at war within her. "And what if I say no?" Alexander's expression didn't change. "Then you walk out that door and go back to whatever remains of your life. But something tells me you wouldn't be here if you still believed you had other choices." She looked down, her fingers twisting in her lap. He was right, and that hurt most of all. The man across from her was offering salvation disguised as sin, and she hated that her heart was already trying to justify it. When she finally met his gaze again, she saw something there, an emptiness that mirrored her own, a kind of loneliness that no amount of money could fill. "I need time," she whispered, standing. "I don't make decisions like this in one meeting." "Take it," he replied, his voice softening slightly. "But Miss Hart, understand this. The offer stands for 1 week only. After that, I move on." Outside, the wind howled through the streets, carrying with it the echoes of her conscience. For days she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, controlled, emotionless, yet somehow human beneath the frost. When she imagined what her mother would say, she could almost hear her voice. Sometimes survival demands impossible choices. By the 5th day, Evelyn sat in front of the contract her lawyer had reviewed twice. The terms were clean, protective, even generous. There was no exploitation here, only a strange form of mercy wrapped in legality. Her hand trembled as she signed her name, sealing a deal that would forever divide her life into before and after. An hour later, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "A car will pick you up tonight at 8. Mr. Graves requests your presence. James Carter, assistant to Alexander Graves." Evelyn stared at the screen, her heart thundering in her chest. This was real now, irrevocably real that evening. Dressed in a simple black dress that Nora had forced her to buy, she stepped into the waiting limousine. The driver said nothing. The city lights blurred past, painting streaks of gold and silver across her reflection. When the car stopped in front of Alexander's private estate, her breath caught. The mansion was a world apart, grand, cold, and breathtaking, the kind of place where power slept beside loneliness. He met her at the door, not in a suit this time, but in a dark shirt, sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable, but his voice was calm. "Miss Hart, are you certain about your decision?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm certain." "Then tonight," he said, his tone gentler than she expected. "We stop being strangers." And as the night stretched on, Evelyn realized that sometimes fate doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it breaks down your door, walks in wearing a 3-piece suit, and asks you to make the most impossible choice of your life. The contract of hearts. The night that followed felt like the longest of Evelyn's life. The silence in Alexander Graves's mansion was heavy, filled with unspoken questions and strange anticipation. She had stepped into that house as a woman driven by desperation. But as the night deepened, something in her heart began to shift. The marble floors gleamed beneath the soft light of chandeliers, the distant sound of rain brushing against the tall windows, and the faint scent of sandalwood filled the air. It was a house that looked alive but felt dead inside. Just like its owner, Alexander moved with quiet precision, his presence commanding yet strangely calm. He did not touch her carelessly or look at her like an object. His every movement carried restraint, dignity, and control, and in that restraint, Evelyn saw something she did not expect: loneliness. When morning came, the golden light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the white sheets. Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart a mix of fear, confusion, and guilt. She had crossed a line she never imagined crossing. But strangely, there was no shame, only a deep, haunting quiet that followed her into every breath. Alexander was already dressed when she came downstairs, his suit crisp, his hair perfectly in place, as if the night before had been nothing more than a business meeting. He looked at her once, and in that look there was no lust, no regret, just acknowledgement, a quiet understanding of the contract they had both signed. "Your medical checkups will begin next week," he said evenly, handing her a folder of documents. "You'll stay at one of my apartments for privacy. Nora will assist you with arrangements. Everything has been taken care of." Evelyn took the folder silently, her voice caught between gratitude and unease. "Is this really just business to you?" she asked finally. Alexander paused, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "Everything in my life is business, Miss Hart. Feelings are distractions I can't afford." Then he walked away, leaving her with a question that echoed louder than any answer. Days turned into weeks, and life began to shift in quiet, unfamiliar ways. The apartment Alexander provided was luxurious beyond anything Evelyn had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling glass, modern art, and views that stretched across the entire city, yet, no matter how soft the bed or how golden the sunrise, she often woke up feeling empty. The doctors confirmed her pregnancy within 3 weeks. The news came with tears she couldn't explain, happiness mixed with fear, because while the life inside her grew, her heart was torn between duty and something far deeper. Alexander visited her rarely, always in a black car that arrived without sound. He would step inside, carrying small things: vitamins, fresh fruit, books about motherhood. His gestures, quiet but deliberate. "You don't have to do this," she said once, surprised by his thoughtfulness. "You could send someone." "I could," he replied, "but I prefer to see for myself." There was something different in his tone, softer, heavier, like a man fighting battles inside that no one could see. Evelyn began to notice small cracks in his perfect armor, nights when his eyes looked tired, hands that trembled when he thought no one watched, and silences that spoke of a past far darker than his suits. One evening, as rain poured outside, she found him sitting in her living room, staring out the window, the city lights reflecting off his face. "You shouldn't be here alone so late," she said gently. "You have a company to run, don't you?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "The company runs itself. I just pretend I'm in control." She sat across from him, watching the way his jaw tightened, the way his voice lowered when he spoke. "Tell me something," she said quietly. "Why do you hate love so much?" Alexander's eyes shifted toward her, the silver in them cold yet wounded. "Because love is a lie," he said after a moment. "It promises forever but leaves you with ashes. My mother believed in it until it killed her. My father loved another woman while she wasted away. I learned early that emotions destroy everything they touch." Evelyn's throat tightened, his words slicing through her heart like glass. "Maybe love didn't destroy you," she whispered. "Maybe it's the lack of it that did." That night, after he left, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Her thoughts were filled with images of him, powerful, untouchable, yet deeply broken. She had expected cruelty, but found sadness instead. And in her heart, an unspoken fear grew stronger each day. She was beginning to care. She told herself it was foolish, that this was a contract, nothing more. But every time his voice lingered in her memory, every time his gaze softened for just a second, the walls she had built inside began to crumble. As her pregnancy progressed, her body changed, but so did her spirit. She began to paint again, something she had given up years ago, filling the blank walls of her apartment with color and life. She cooked small meals from her mother's recipes, the scent of cinnamon and honey filling the air. It was as if she was reclaiming parts of herself she thought had died in the fire. Sometimes when Alexander came by, he would pause by the paintings, his eyes unreadable. "You're talented," he said once quietly. "You could have been anything." She smiled faintly. I wanted to be happy, that's all. Success was just a side dream. He looked at her then, and for the first time his gaze held something fragile, something almost like longing. Months passed, and their conversations grew longer, softer, more real. Evelyn discovered that beneath Alexander's cold precision lived a man haunted by guilt and silence. She learned he had lost his younger sister in an accident years ago, something he blamed himself for, and since then he had buried himself in work, avoiding any form of love or warmth. But now, each time he saw her belly grow, each time he felt the heartbeat of the life inside her, something inside him began to stir. He would place his hand lightly on her stomach and whisper things he thought she didn't hear. Words of fear, of hope, of promises he didn't understand himself. On a quiet winter night, when the city slept under snow, Evelyn stood by the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sky. The baby kicked softly, and she smiled, tears welling in her eyes. Alexander appeared behind her, his footsteps quiet. You should be resting, he said, his voice low. It's freezing. I like the cold, she replied. It reminds me that I'm alive. He stood beside her, the distance between them smaller than it had ever been. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. This arrangement. She looked at him, her voice trembling. At first, yes. I hated myself for saying yes, but now... She paused, searching his eyes. Now I think maybe it was meant to happen. Maybe you needed this as much as I did. For the first time, Alexander's composure cracked. His eyes softened, his breath unsteady. You think I needed this? I think you needed someone to remind you you're human, she whispered. He didn't answer, just looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. Evelyn, when this is over, when the baby is born, you'll get your freedom, you'll get your money, you can go wherever you want. But even as he said the words, his eyes betrayed the truth. He didn't want her to go. She smiled sadly. Freedom doesn't mean leaving, Alexander. Sometimes it means finding a place where you finally belong. He turned away, unable to face what her words stirred inside him. The man who once believed love was a weakness was now standing on the edge of something far more dangerous, feeling. That night, long after she had gone to sleep, Alexander stood outside her door, his hand hovering over the knob. But he couldn't bring himself to open it, because for the first time in years, he was terrified, not of loss, but of the possibility of love. The breaking point. Winter gave way to a bright spring that made the whole city glitter like glass, and Evelyn felt the baby move more each day, gentle kicks like little secrets tapping from the inside. And with every flutter she whispered promises that she would be the kind of mother who fought for calm in storms and light in dark rooms. Alexander came by more often now, not like a CEO checking a box, but like a man who was trying to learn how to breathe again. He would pause at the door and ask if she had eaten, if she had slept, if the doctor had called back. And sometimes he stayed long enough to drink tea in silence while watching snow melt from the rooftops. The distance between them was smaller, but it was still there, thin as paper and strong as steel. Then one afternoon, a headline burst across the city's feeds, a cruel slice of gossip in shiny letters. Billionaire's heir from secret deal, and beneath it a photo of Evelyn stepping out of the clinic with her hand on her belly. Alexander's name was everywhere. The board of his company was in an emergency session within hours, and by evening, the world had drawn a story out of strangers' whispers and decided to believe it. The apartment that once felt safe now felt like an exposed window. Nora came straight from the hospital, dropped her bag and hugged Evelyn tight, telling her to breathe, telling her to drink water, telling her not to read comments. The phones would not stop ringing. The building manager called to ask if the guards should send away reporters. And Evelyn stood in the center of the living room with her hand flat on her stomach, telling the baby the only thing that made sense: you are wanted. You are safe. Alexander arrived like thunder that night. Not loud, but heavy with storm. He walked through the door already on the phone, speaking in clipped tones to legal and PR, doing the billionaire dance of damage control. But when he ended the call and finally looked at her, all the armor slipped. Are you hurt? He asked, not meaning physical pain, and she shook her head slowly, then nodded. Because some pain cannot be seen, he moved closer and stopped, as if asking permission to exist in the same air. "I'll protect you," he said, and it was the first time it sounded like a promise to a person and not a line from a contract. Morning brought a knock that did not wait for an answer. Harold Benton, chair of the board and master of cold smiles, stepped inside with 2 lawyers at his back. He glanced at Evelyn once and then looked past her like she was furniture. Addressing Alexander with the tone of a headmaster correcting a child, "This is a fiasco. Shareholders are furious. The markets are nervous and your judgment is under review." He slid a folder onto the coffee table. The papers inside, full of clauses about conduct and reputation and heirs, produced within traditional arrangements. Evelyn didn't know what that meant until Benton lifted his eyes with a little sneer. "Our investors prefer a wife," he said. "A marriage would settle this noise, or at minimum, a formal engagement. We could present a family image and calm the street." Evelyn felt heat rush to her face. The baby shifted as if protesting too, and she looked at Alexander, waiting, afraid, hoping. Alexander's jaw tightened. "This is my private life," he said, voice low and dangerous. "The board does not dictate it." Benton's smile never moved. "Your father's legacy and this company's stability do. We expect your decision by Friday." Then he nodded to the lawyers and left the scent of expensive paper behind. Silence settled like dust, and it made everything louder inside the heart. Evelyn tried to speak, but Alexander spoke first. "I won't be forced," he said, pacing once, twice like a caged animal. "I won't turn you into a headline bride to clean up their mess." The words should have comforted her, but they hit a different nerve, because beneath them she heard something else, a refusal to feel, a refusal to name what had grown between them. "So what am I?" she asked in a voice she did not recognize. "Am I only a mother for your hair? A good story if hidden and a bad story if seen." Alexander stopped moving, his eyes sharp with pain he did not know how to hold. "You're not a story," he said. "You're the only true thing in my life." And yet he could not say the word love, could not even reach for it. And that made the room colder than any winter. The next days became a pressure chamber. The company's stock dipped, the board pressed harder. Reporters followed Nora to work, and a smear blog suggested Evelyn was a gold digger who had trapped a powerful man. She tried to ignore it until she saw a photo of her burned bakery attached to a cruel line about a woman who turns failure into fortune. She trembled so badly she couldn't stand. Nora found her on the floor and held her like a sister. And when Alexander arrived minutes later, he went white with a rage that made the walls feel small. He took her hand, steadying her, and for a moment she saw the boy he must have been, desperate to keep everyone from breaking. "This ends now," he said. And the next morning, his lawyers filed suits against defamation, issued statements about medical privacy, and the worst sites took down the lies. Yet none of that could fix the thing that had cracked between them when Benton said the word wife like a cure for a disease. On Friday, the boardroom buzzed like a hive while Alexander stood at the head of the table, all glass behind him, and the city stretched like a map of power and choices. Benton slid out the same papers and added another form. This one simple and brutal, a proposed engagement agreement with a timeline, a ring, a schedule of appearances. "Sign this and we restore confidence," Benton said. "Or refuse and accept the risk that control provisions are triggered." Everyone watched. Everyone waited. And then Alexander did the one thing that no one expected. He closed the folder and said, "I won't sign to perform a life that isn't real." Benton laughed softly. "Then make it real," he said. "Marry the girl." The room had no oxygen for a heartbeat, and Evelyn, watching through the glass from the adjoining lounge because she had insisted on coming to face the world with her head high, felt her own heart slam against her ribs. This was not a proposal. This was a transaction dressed as a rescue. Alexander turned toward the glass as if he could feel her breathing. Their eyes met, and he shook his head almost imperceptibly. A plea and a promise, not like this, his eyes said. Not because they said so. That night the pressure found a weak seam. Evelyn woke to a tightness across her lower belly, a hard band of fear that made sweat bead at her temples. She tried to breathe slow, tried to drink water, tried to tell herself it was normal, but the pain came back, sharper, and her hands shook as she called Nora. Within minutes, Alexander was at the door with the driver and a blanket. His calm, precise, and barely holding. At the hospital, the lights were too bright, the air too clean, and time moved like cold syrup. The doctor examined her and said words that brought heat to her face and tears to her eyes. Stress is exacerbating your symptoms. You need quiet. You need protection from outside triggers. This pregnancy is healthy, but you must treat peace like medicine. Evelyn nodded and swallowed and stared at the ceiling while Alexander stood at the window with his hands clenched, taking a blame that belonged to 1,000 voices and one boardroom. When the doctor left, he came to her side and knelt, the king of glass towers on the tile floor. "I did this," he said. "I let them in. I thought power meant control." "And I was wrong." She put a hand on his face, gentle and firm. "Then choose peace," she whispered. "Choose us." The next morning, he did something few men with empires do. He stepped back. He gave up a slice of control to protect the quiet. He appointed his most trusted COO as interim face for the markets, moved meetings off-site, told legal to ignore every wedding clause, and moved Evelyn to a farmhouse 2 hours from the city that belonged to his mother. A place of long wooden tables and worn cotton curtains, and a porch that looked out on a field. Nora arranged the medical schedule. Security kept a soft distance, and for the first time since the fire, Evelyn slept without waking to the sound of sirens in her head. Alexander came every evening, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with old records he found in a dusty cabinet, sometimes with nothing but silence that was easy to share. He fixed a door hinge that squeaked and burned dinner twice and laughed like he hadn't laughed since boyhood. And the baby kicked harder when his voice filled the room, as if recognizing the music of home. In that quiet, the truth had room to grow. One dusk after a soft rain, they sat on the steps watching clouds drift like slow ships. Evelyn spoke of her mother's hands, of cinnamon rolls and the way love tastes when it is warm and ordinary. Alexander spoke of the little sister who used to chase sparrows in their father's cold gardens, of the guilt that welded shut every door inside his chest when she died on a road he had told her was safe. Evelyn listened without judgment, and when he was done, she took his shaking hand and held it until the tremor passed. "You didn't kill love," she said. "You buried it to survive." His eyes shone with a grief that was not sharp anymore, only deep. "And you dug it up," he whispered. "With flour and courage and the sound of your voice reading baby books to a belly." They did not kiss, they did not rush. They simply leaned against each other and let the fall of evening stitch something strong and quiet between their hearts. Peace cannot stop the world from turning, only teach the heart to stand steady. A week later, a black car pulled up the dirt road and Benton stepped out in leather shoes that hated soil. He did not come inside. He stood on the porch with a printed statement and a smirk that tried to be polite. "The board will move to curtail your authority if this circus continues," he said. "There is a clean solution. The public will forgive any sin if it is wrapped in a ring and a baby blanket." Alexander looked at him with a calm that came from a different kind of power, the kind that grows in kitchens and fields. "We are not a scandal to be cleaned," he answered. "We are a family becoming real. And I will not make a vow to soothe your grafts." Benton's smirk cracked. "Then you accept the consequences," he said. "Control votes, public fights, a legacy stained." Alexander did not move. "If a legacy survives only by killing the truth, it deserves to die." And for the first time, Benton had no script. He left without shaking hands, and the dust of the road rose to erase the mark of his tires. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Evelyn finally said the words she had been holding like a seed in her mouth. She told him she loved him not as payment for safety, not as gratitude for money, but as the only honest answer to what had grown between long talks and quiet mornings and the soft thump of tiny feet inside her. Alexander closed his eyes like a man who had been underwater too long and had just found air. He did not say the word back yet. He did something braver for a man like him. He laid his head against her belly and whispered to their child that he would learn, that he would try, that he would do the work of a heart waking up. Evelyn put both hands in his hair and cried, not from fear now, but from relief that the path ahead was not made of marble and boardrooms, but of porches and apologies and little socks that would go missing in the wash. In the morning, the city would start shouting again, and the board would bare its teeth and old ghosts would try to crawl back into living rooms through glowing screens. But the farmhouse had given them a center, a place to stand. And when Alexander finally lifted his face to the light coming through the thin white curtains, he whispered the word he had once called a weakness and now understood as strength. Not loud, not for show, just for her and the child and the quiet that held them all. "Stay," he said, and in that word was love. And in that love was war. And in that war he chose them, again and again, no matter how loud the world became. The Fall and the Promise. The day after Benton's visit dawned gray and quiet, the kind of morning that feels like the pause between heartbeats before something changes forever. And inside the farmhouse, Evelyn awoke to the sound of birds tapping against the windows, light spilling across the wooden floor like liquid gold. For a moment it was peaceful, for a moment it was ordinary, and then the phone began to ring, sharp and insistent. Alexander answered. His tone clipped, and the words that followed turned that golden light into ash. The board had voted to suspend him temporarily pending a leadership review. Investors were calling for separation between his private and professional life, and the empire his father had built was now trying to devour its heir. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, watching his face pale, his control flicker for the first time since she had known him. "They've taken everything," he said quietly, staring out the window like he could see the skyline that had once belonged to him. "Not everything," she whispered, her hand finding his. "You still have us." The days that followed blurred together in slow panic. Lawyers came and went, phones rang until their batteries died. Headlines screamed about betrayal and scandal and a billionaire's fall. And through it all, Evelyn tried to keep the house filled with warmth. She baked bread, she hummed to the baby. She told Alexander stories about her mother's small kindnesses, trying to remind him that life existed beyond numbers and boardrooms. But she could feel the guilt eating at him, the way he stood by the window long after midnight, staring at a world that no longer bent to his will. "You lost your company, not your soul," she told him one night. And he turned toward her, his face shadowed and tired. "But that's all I was," he said. "Without it, I don't know who I am." "Then maybe now you get to find out," she replied softly, and her words lingered in the air like a prayer he didn't yet know how to answer. Weeks passed, and for the first time Alexander was forced to be still. To live without meetings or headlines, he fixed fences, learned how to cook simple meals that didn't come from caterers, and helped Evelyn with doctor appointments. The world beyond their quiet life moved on with its noise. But here, something sacred grew, not perfect, but real. He would talk to the baby at night, his voice low, his words unguarded, telling stories about the stars, about courage, about beginnings. Evelyn listened from the doorway sometimes, her heart twisting with love and fear, because she knew what was coming. He couldn't stay hidden forever. One evening, Nora arrived with news that felt like a storm breaking over still water. "The board has called for a public hearing," she said. "They're accusing Alexander of misappropriation, of using company resources for personal gain." Evelyn froze. "They mean me." Nora nodded grimly. "They mean all of this." Alexander stood still for a long moment, then said quietly, "They want to humiliate me into disappearing." "Then fight," Evelyn said. "Don't let them turn what we built into their weapon." But he shook his head. "If I fight, they'll drag you into it. They'll say worse things. They'll hurt you to hurt me." She took his face in her hands. "They already hurt us, Alex, but they can't break what's true." His eyes softened, a storm quieting, and he kissed her forehead gently. "You saved me once," he whispered. "Let me protect you now." The next week was a blur of lawyers and headlines, and then came the day of the hearing, the city's courthouse gleaming cold under the sun. Alexander walked in wearing the same composure he had built his empire on, but there was something new behind his eyes, a kind of peace that came from losing everything except what mattered. Evelyn wanted to go with him, but he made her promise to stay home. "This fight is mine," he said. "Yours is here, keeping our world safe." She stood on the porch, watching his car disappear down the road, one hand resting on her belly, whispering to the baby, "Your father is braver than he knows." Inside the courthouse, Alexander faced the same men who had once applauded his every move. Benton sat across the long table, smug, controlled, his voice smooth as poison. "You've embarrassed this institution," he said. "You've risked billions on sentiment, on weakness, on some rural fantasy. Do you deny it?" Alexander looked at him and for the first time smiled. Not the cold smile of power, but the quiet one of a man who has nothing left to prove. "I don't deny it," he said. "For years, I built this company on fear, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of love, and I called it strength. But strength without heart is just emptiness. I won't apologize for finding something real," Benton scoffed. "You've destroyed your father's legacy." "No," Alexander said. "I've redefined it." The hearing dragged for hours. The press outside hungry for scandal, and by sunset, the verdict came. Alexander would lose controlling interest in the company for 5 years. A temporary exile, but not ruin. He walked out into the fading light, the cameras flashing, and for the first time, he didn't hide from them. He spoke into the noise, his voice calm and steady. "There was a time when I thought power was measured by how much you could own. Now I know it's measured by what you're willing to lose to protect what's right." The words spread faster than any rumor, and by nightfall, social media had turned from mockery to admiration. The world loves a redemption story, especially when it's true. At home, Evelyn waited on the porch, the sky bruised purple with twilight. When she saw his car, she ran to meet him, not caring about decorum or headlines or fear. He stepped out, his face tired but soft, and she threw her arms around him. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's done." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "No, it's beginning," she said, and kissed him with a tenderness that broke every rule they had built. And in that kiss, the world outside vanished. That night, they lay together under the soft hum of summer insects, their fingers intertwined, their breaths sinking like promises. And for the first time, Alexander let himself imagine a future not defined by contracts or inheritance, but by moments like this. "When the baby comes," he said quietly, "I want to be here, not in some boardroom fighting ghosts. I want to build something new." "Then we will," she said. "Together," and he smiled, a real smile, the kind that erases years of walls. "Evelyn," he murmured, "I don't know how to be what you deserve." She traced her fingers along his cheek. "Then just be honest, that's more than I ever asked." Weeks passed in calm, but the calm before change is always fragile. One night, the phone rang again, and this time it was the hospital. Her voice broke before she could speak. "It's early," she said. "Too early." The next hours blurred into panic. Sirens, lights, the sterile cold of delivery rooms. Alexander pacing like a man drowning, praying to gods he never believed in. And then at dawn, a cry filled the air, small and fierce, the sound of life refusing to be quiet. Evelyn smiled weakly as the nurse placed a tiny bundle in her arms. "She's perfect," she whispered, tears spilling freely. Alexander stood beside her, silent, reverent, his hands trembling as he touched his daughter's fingers for the first time. In that moment, everything else, money, pride, legacy, melted away, and he understood finally what his mother had meant when she used to say that love is the only empire that doesn't crumble. He leaned down and kissed Evelyn's forehead, then their child's, and said the words he had never believed he would say. "You've given me everything I never knew I needed." Outside the window, the sun rose over the city, painting the sky gold again. A quiet promise that even after the worst storms, there is always another dawn waiting to be born. And for Alexander and Evelyn, that dawn had just begun. The return of love. The months after their daughter's birth unfolded in a rhythm that neither of them had ever known before. A rhythm built not on the ticking of boardroom clocks, but on the soft sighs of a baby learning to breathe, to cry, to laugh. The farmhouse that had once echoed with silence was now filled with the sound of lullabies and small feet against old wooden floors. Evelyn healed slowly, her body finding strength again, her eyes glowing with that quiet light that only new mothers carry. And Alexander stayed close through every night feed, every fever, every moment of panic and wonder. He learned to hold bottles with one hand while answering calls with the other, to rock the cradle until dawn when sleep refused to come. And in that tender exhaustion, he found the thing he had spent his life avoiding: vulnerability. He realized that love was not the weakness he had once feared, but the place where all strength begins. He named their daughter Hope, because she was the proof that something beautiful could rise from everything broken. And as the seasons changed, the fields outside bloomed again, life returning to every corner of the world they had built. The empire he had lost began to seem like a dream from another life, a life of marble and mirrors that no longer mattered. But as peace settled deeper, whispers from the city began to rise again. A new CEO had taken his seat, changes were being made, divisions sold, workers laid off, projects his father had built being dismantled. And though Alexander had sworn never to go back, the thought of his people, those who had believed in him, haunted him. One evening he stood by the window, watching the sunset stain the fields gold, his daughter sleeping against Evelyn's shoulder, and said quietly, "They're tearing it apart." Evelyn looked at him with calm eyes. "Then maybe it needs rebuilding." "Not by me," he said. "My name would make it worse." "Then by the man you've become," she whispered. "The one who learned that building isn't about power. It's about care." Her words stayed with him long into the night. Weeks later, an old friend from the company came to visit. David, one of the few who had remained loyal, his face lined with fatigue. "They're cutting corners," he said. "Ignoring safety, chasing short-term profits. It's turning into something ugly, Alex. The old team is lost without leadership." Alexander listened, silent, his hand tracing circles on the table. "If I go back," he said finally, "it can't be as the man I was. It has to be different." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then go back as a father, not a boss. Go back to protect, not to prove." That night, as hope slept between them, Alexander decided that some battles were worth fighting not to reclaim the past, but to safeguard the future. The following week, he traveled to the city for the first time in nearly a year. The skyline that once looked like a crown now felt like a test. Reporters swarmed the building, cameras flashing. Questions thrown like arrows. "Mr. Graves, are you returning to reclaim control? Is this revenge?" He paused, then spoke clearly. "This isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility. I made mistakes. I let pride lead me, but no more. I'm here because thousands of families depend on this company, and they deserve leadership that remembers what integrity means." His words spread across every channel. And in that moment, the world saw not the fallen billionaire, but a man who had rebuilt himself from humility. Inside the boardroom, Benton was gone, removed after his own mismanagement came to light, and the new members were wary but open. Alexander didn't demand control. He offered partnership, a vision that merged business with ethics, profit with purpose. "We can still make greatness," he said, "but not if we keep burning hearts to fuel it." The room was silent for a long time before one voice spoke. "You've changed," and he answered simply, "Yes, I have, because I finally lost enough to understand what matters." Over the next months, the company stabilized, projects revived, old workers rehired, new scholarships started for young inventors in memory of his sister. He created a new division named Haven Innovations, dedicated to sustainable design and family welfare. And when the first daycare opened inside the corporate building with Hope's picture on the wall, Evelyn stood beside him, tears in her eyes. "You built something real?" she said. "No, we did," he replied. "At home. Life was not perfect, but peaceful. Evenings were spent on the porch, Hope playing in the grass while Alexander read aloud from storybooks in a voice that once commanded empires. The sound of laughter replaced the echo of loss, and for the first time, he knew that happiness wasn't a destination, but a daily choice. One afternoon, Evelyn found an old folder in a drawer. Yellowed papers from the original contract she had signed, numbers, clauses, sterile promises, and she sat by the fire reading them, tears falling quietly when Alexander entered. He saw it in her lap and froze. I should have burned that long ago, he said softly. No, she replied. It's a reminder of how far we've come, of who we were before love taught us to be better. He knelt beside her, took her hands, and said, Evelyn, when I asked you for a child, I thought I was buying a future. But you gave me something no contract could. You gave me a soul, she smiled through tears. And you gave me courage. Then, as the fire cracked behind them, he took a small box from his pocket. Inside lay a ring simple and bright. I never asked you properly, he said, his voice unsteady, not as a bargain, not as redemption, but because I cannot imagine a single day without you. Will you marry me? Evelyn covered her mouth, laughter and tears mixing in the same breath. Yes, she whispered, 1,000 times yes. And when he slipped the ring on her finger, it was not a symbol of wealth, but of the promise they had already lived. Their wedding was small, held under the same oak tree that shaded the farmhouse porch. Nora stood beside Evelyn, hope scattered petals in wild delight. And the vows they spoke were simple. He promised never to forget what love had taught him. She promised to keep reminding him. When they kissed, the wind rose as if blessing them. Years passed like pages turned gently. Hope grew into a bright, fearless girl with her mother's warmth and her father's eyes. She would climb onto Alexander's lap and ask for the story of how her parents met. And he would laugh, glance at Evelyn, and say, Your mother saved me from a life without heart, Evelyn would add softly. And your father taught me that even broken people can build something beautiful. Sometimes they visited the city, standing on the rooftop of the new headquarters where his name no longer meant power but promise. He would look at the skyline and then at her. Do you ever regret it? He would ask, and she would smile. Only that I didn't believe in miracles sooner. He would pull her close and say, You were the miracle. And for a long while they would stand there in silence, watching the lights flicker like stars, learning how to rise. When the years turned their hair silver and their steps slower, they still walked hand in hand down the same dirt road behind the farmhouse, the one lined with wildflowers, the one where it had all begun. And sometimes Alexander would stop, look at the horizon and whisper, I used to think freedom meant never needing anyone. But it was you who taught me that real freedom is being brave enough to love. Evelyn would squeeze his hand, her eyes shining with peace. And you taught me that love isn't a fairy tale. It's a choice you keep making, even when it's hard. As the sun dipped low, painting the world in gold and fire, their daughter's laughter echoed from the field, the sound blending with the wind and the rustle of the trees. And in that golden light, time seemed to hold still. The story that began as a contract had become a legacy of hope, a testament to the truth that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most extraordinary lives. And somewhere in that quiet, beneath the vast sky and the whispering fields, two hearts that had once been broken beat together as one, proving that love, when it's real, doesn't save you from life. It teaches you how to live it again and again forever.